So it's no secret that I'm not the best at pronouncing things.
Medej.
Junkos. As you just saw in the 2 videos I've made, I've already mispronounced at least one thing. So I thought I'd make a video about 10 dinosaurs I used to mispronounce all the time. Now, most of these dinosaurs come from these 2 books. This one being really well loved. And you're probably thinking, oh, you were a kid. It's totally fine if you mispronounce some of these. I'm just gonna flip to a random page. They have the pronunciation right there on the page. So I was just being really stupid, I guess. I'm gonna be presenting them like the dinosaurs I used to mispronounce in alphabetical order. So on that note, let's get started. All right, first one, Carnotaurus, or as I used to pronounce it, Carnotaurus. Carnotaurus was an abelisaur, meaning it was related to dinosaurs like Abelisaurus, and Scorpiovenator, and also Majungasaurus, which is best known for being the starter dinosaur in the Jurassic World mobile game. In fact, Carnotaurus was the second ever abelisaur to be found, after Abelisaurus, of course. Carnotaurus was discovered by Jose Bonaparte in 1985 and lived in late Cretaceous South America, or in modern-day Argentina, sort of near the tip of the continent. It's the only ever specimen of Carnotaurus discovered, actually. Luckily, it's extremely well preserved and includes skin impressions, with only parts of the tail and legs being missing. The habitat was warm and humid, with many lakes and estuaries. It shared a habitat with dinosaurs like Saltosaurus and Mipe. Carnotaurus was about 30 feet long, putting it at about the size of the average school bus. That actually makes it one of the largest abelisaurids. Carnotaurus' most notable feature are the 2 horns on its head, giving it its name, carnivorous bull, or meat-eating bull. These horns were most likely used for ramming during mating rituals, or for display for mating. It also had extremely tiny arms. Like, people make fun of T-Rex for its arms, but this guy had it way worse. These arms are most likely vestigial, but some suggest they had a function in mating. It was also very lightly built and had the ability to run extremely fast, with some studies saying it could run up to 35 miles an hour, making it the fastest large theropod. Because of its speed, we know it probably didn't feed on larger herbivores, meaning it probably hunted smaller ankylosaurs like Pedagopelta, or probably juvenile sauropods. Alright, so next up is Deinonychus, meaning terrible hand, which I somehow thought was pronounced Dinocheirus, like it was some sort of British gentleman. Deinonychus was a weird dinosaur, and the history behind it is somehow even weirder. Like, this could be its own video. But for now, here are the spark notes in heavy quotes. I tried to trim this down as much as I could, and it is still really, really long. Deinonychus was an ornithomimosaur, meaning this weirdo's closest relatives are things like Struthiomimus and Archaeornithomimus. See, I can pronounce some things. Deinonychus was discovered by... oh, fuck, it's a Polish name. Give me a second. Zofia Kielan-Jaworowska in 1965 and lived in late Cretaceous Mongolia in what is now the Gobi Desert. The first specimen was made up of just the arms and spawned many wild and outlandish theories. Deinonychus' environment was marshy and humid, and it shared its environment with potential predator Tarbosaurus and also Saurolophus, not to be confused with Parasaurolophus. Yeah, sometimes I just hate dinosaur names. The next Deinonychus specimen wasn't discovered for another 50 years until 2014, giving us the first image of this fuck-ass ostrich we know and love today. Deinonychus stood at 40 feet long and 16 feet tall, making this an absolute unit of a dinosaur. This is about the length of a standard shipping container and about the height of a giraffe. That's absolutely gigantic. Like, if you can't picture that, like, I know you probably can't, but it's huge. That is a huge dinosaur. Its most notable feature are its long claws and sail-like hump. The claws were most likely used to dredge up aquatic plants and scoop up small prey to shovel into its large beak-like mouth, because this guy was an omnivore. And its hump was possibly used for fat storage, similar to the humps of camels. Alright, so next up is Deinonychus, which I called Deinonychus so often that I still catch myself doing it to this day. Deinonychus was a dromaeosaur, meaning it was closely related to dinosaurs like Velociraptor. Yeah, I know. Like this little guy here. Isn't he cool? I mean, he's a bit broken because he's old, but yeah. It's also closely related to Utahraptor, which I got to see the holotype of this past summer, and my personal favorite, Microraptor. If you can't already tell, I'm basic and love Dromaeosaurs. Deinonychus was discovered in 1931 by Barnum Brown, and later described by John Ostrom in 1969. This description actually led to a paleontological event known as the Dinosaur Renaissance. Deinonychus lived in the modern-day states of Wyoming, Oklahoma, Utah, and Montana. This area would have been along the western anterior seaway. The habitat would have been full of coastal plains and subtropical forests. Deinonychus lived alongside dinosaurs such as Acrocanthosaurus, Microvenador, and Sauroposeidon. Deinonychus was about 11 feet long, making it our smallest guy so far, but it was far from harmless. Deinonychus means terrible claw. It used these claws to...
And he slashes at you with this.
No, it used these claws to pin its prey while hunting. Deinonychus was lightly built, which allowed it to be quick and agile while catching prey. Deinonychus mainly hunted smaller animals like Tsintaosaurus, which was actually found alongside the Deinonychus holotype. As many of you probably know, the velociraptors in Jurassic Park were actually based off of Deinonychus, but whether or not Deinonychus actually hunted in packs is still disputed. To honor Deinonychus for being the source of the raptors, Universal decided to make them this hideous and grotesque design. How thoughtful. Sorry, I just needed to rant about that. On to the next one. Okay, next is Diplodocus, or Diplodocus, if you're me. Apparently I really struggle with pronouncing names that start with D's. I wonder if there's like a superstitious reason for that. Diplodocus was a late Jurassic sauropod, with its closest relative being Apatosaurus. It was discovered in 1877 by Benjamin Mudge and was described by O.C. Marsh, an infamous paleontologist who will definitely get his own video at some point. Its name means double beam because Marsh ran out of dinosaur names by this point, because of the quote-unquote chevrons on the bottom of its tail vertebrae. Diplodocus lived in the same area as Deinonychus, just 45 million years beforehand. At the time, the area was very deserty and arid with some floodplains. It most likely lived alongside some close relatives like the famous Brachiosaurus and Apatosaurus, along with potential predators like Allosaurus and Ceratosaurus. Diplodocus was an absolute titan of an animal, with size estimates up to 85 feet in length. That's roughly how tall a 6-story building is. Its most notable feature is its whip-like tail that was possibly used as a defense mechanism. And with the whip part of the tail being about an inch thick, it was probably really effective. Diplodocus's tail also had the ability to crack like a whip, which would have been absolutely terrifying to hear. Its other notable feature is its relatively small skull compared to its body. From skin impressions, we also know it had spines along its back similar to those of iguanas. Alright, so this one's a little more fair. I've seen a lot of people pronounce it wrong. It's, of course, Giganotosaurus, aka Gigantosaurus. Its name means giant southern lizard because it was, guess what? A giant reptile from the south. Crazy, I know. Giganotosaurus was a late surviving carcharodontosaur that lived in the late Cretaceous, a sort of relic left behind. It was closely related to Carcharodontosaurus, which is an absolute pain to pronounce, and also Tyrannotitan. Giganotosaurus was discovered in 1983 by Ruben Carolini in roughly the same area Carnotaurus would eventually inhabit. At this time, the environment was extremely humid and swampy, similar to the modern-day Everglades or Amazon River basin. It shared its habitat with other dinosaurs like Argentinosaurus, which Giganotosaurus most likely hunted. It also lived alongside some newer faces on the scene like Paraves, such as Butiroraptor, which is also in that book. It also lived alongside Araripasuchus, which was a predominantly land-based croc. Basically, instead of swimming, it ran. Giganotosaurus was huge. It could reach lengths of 43 feet, or roughly the same size as Deinocheirus. However, this doesn't make it
Biggest carnivore the world has ever seen.
I'm seriously starting to doubt how qualified Dr. Grant was. He confused Deinonychus for Velociraptor, he claimed it used its claw to gut its prey, and now he's claiming Giganotosaurus was the biggest land predator. Giganotosaurus is one of the most completed carcharodontosaurs, meaning it gives us a window into the group as a whole. Giganotosaurus's most notable feature is its narrow and fragile-looking jaw. This appearance actually made people question its placement as an apex predator. but now we're relatively sure it fits that niche. There's also evidence that Giganotosaurus was homeothermic, meaning unlike most reptiles, it had a high internal body temp that remained constant. Overall, an incredible dinosaur, and I'm so glad I got to research it for this video because I didn't know half of this stuff beforehand. Nurosaurus. Alright, so this one is a little more niche than the first 5. I used to pronounce this one as Nurosaurus, like it was a brain or something. But that's not all. It's also on the cover of this book. And until about 2 years ago, I thought this guy was Argentinosaurus. Despite it clearly being in the desert. I don't know, man. My own stupidity shocks me sometimes. Anyways, back on topic, or as on topic as this part can be. See, the thing is, Nurosaurus isn't officially real, so there's not too much on it, but I'll try my best. Nurosaurus, meaning Nor lizard, was discovered in China in the Gobi Desert and was proposed as a genus in 1992 by Zhiming Dong. If it is valid, it's speculated that its closest relative would be Camarasaurus. It lived in the early Cretaceous during a time when the area was humid, lush, and full of floodplains. We don't really know what it lived alongside because it's just so informally described. If valid, Nurosaurus was around the same size as Diplodocus and might have filled similar niches considering they might be closely related. Again, all of this is speculation because this is a weird-ass dinosaur with barely any formal description of it. I'm convinced that Nat Geo just told the artist to draw a generic sauropod in the desert because it didn't even live in the fucking desert. By the way, it gets so much more chaotic from this point on. Like, some of the other ones are somehow more chaotic than this thing. Next is Plateosaurus, or as I called it, Plateosaurus, like it was a waiter or something. It's actually the oldest guy we've covered so far, living during the late Triassic when dinosaurs started getting a foothold. Plateosaurus was an early sauropod-like dinosaur that would eventually pave the way for titans like Argentinosaurus and Dreadnoughtus. It was still ways away from those guys though. At this point in time, Plateosaurus and its relatives like Deinonychus were still bipedal, with some studies suggesting they were partially omnivorous. It was discovered in 1834 by Johann Friedrich Engelhardt and described in 1837 by Hermann von Meyer. It's actually one of the oldest named dinosaur genre to still be considered valid, which is a pretty crazy achievement. As you can probably tell by the name of the person who discovered it, Plateosaurus lived in what is now Germany and Central Europe. The area it lived in looked very similar to the American Badlands and had frequent flooding. It most likely lived alongside fellow dinosaurs like Celticosaurus, which might not be valid, and some phytosaurs like, well, Phytosaurus, which is definitely not valid. The thing about like older genuses is that they really are scientifically inaccurate and have been debunked, but yeah, both of these were probably too small to take down an adult. Although it didn't reach the sizes its descendants eventually would, Plateosaurus was still nothing to scoff at, growing at an immense 33 feet in length, or the same size as Carnotaurus. Because Plateosaurus was discovered by a bunch of German dudes, its name doesn't make any sense, but it most likely means broad lizard. I have no idea how that relates to the animal, though. Plateosaurus's most notable features have to do with how basal the animal is. It has 5 fingers when most members of its group have 3 or 4. Its teeth are also super sharp, leading to some theories that it was actually carnivorous. I'm super glad I got to cover this guy because Triassic dinosaurs are so interesting. Alright, we've got another Triassic sauropodomorph up next, being Riojasaurus, or Riojasaurus, if you're me. Its closest relative was Nurosaurus, which was another Triassic sauropodomorph that lived in the same area. Riojasaurus was discovered in 1966 in Argentina and described in 1969 by José Bonaparte yet again. Like most of the world at the time, its environment was deserty with tons of floodplains, often coexisting with dinosaurs like Coloratosaurus, which was also described by Bonaparte, and Tsintaosaurus. It was also pretty sizable, roughly the same size as its relative Plateosaurus, or a school bus. Riojasaurus differs from other early sauropodomorphs in some super cool ways though. Unlike most at the time, its arms were very similar length to its legs, meaning it probably walked on all four limbs most of the time. This would make it one of the first ever sauropodomorphs that were showing signs of becoming quadrupedal. Other than that, Riojasaurus was very similar to Plateosaurus. Troodon. Troodon. This was the hardest part of the video to condense. Now, I personally love Troodon, but by God, is it a mess. There's so much random stuff about this guy that I'm not going to do justice in this video, but I'll try anyway. This one's a bit more of a reasonable mispronunciation based on how many people I've seen call it Troodon. Troodon is possibly invalid, possibly not. It's kind of up in the air right now. I think currently it is valid, but I could be wrong. That's the kind of chaos you get when you try to name an animal based on just its teeth. Troodon was discovered in 1855 in Montana and formally described by famed paleontologist Joseph Leidy. Troodon lived in forests, swamps, plains, pretty much anywhere because it's a wastebasket genus. Troodon lived alongside dinosaurs like the cow of the Cretaceous Edmontosaurus and some tyrannosaurs like Albertosaurus and Gorgosaurus. Troodon was a tiny little dude, at most growing up to 8 feet long. Troodon's name means wounding tooth. It was named this because the teeth ascribed to it have serrations on the side. Now, when I first saw that, my immediate thought was, oh, this looks like herbivore teeth, and apparently a lot of people thought the same as well, proposing that Troodon might have been omnivorous. Troodon's teeth also had grooves on them, leading to some people suggesting they might have been venomous, but this has largely been discounted. The thing Troodon is most known for, other than its controversy, is being the quote-unquote smartest dinosaur. How you can determine how smart a dinosaur is based on its teeth is beyond me, but for the sake of the video, let's just go with it. So, I've alluded to the controversy surrounding this guy for the entire section. Finally, it's time to get into it. Back in 2017, Troodon was murdered. Studies showed that the teeth identified as Troodon were completely unrelated animals, some belonging to Deinonychosaurus, effectively killing the genus. But in 2025, so pretty recently, reanalysis of the holotype Deinonychosaurus teeth showed that they were the same as the Troodon holotype teeth, meaning that due to seniority, everyone's favorite wastebasket taxa gets to live. If it stays like that, who knows? Right now, everything is super muddy, but I can't really go into it further because this is already the longest section of the video. Finally, at the end, a somewhat normal one. Tsintaosaurus, or as I like to call it, Tsintaosaurus. Tsintaosaurus was a lambeosaur, meaning it was related to other famous hadrosaurs like Parasaurolophus and Lambeosaurus. It was discovered in 1850 in China and described by another famed paleontologist being C.C. Young. When Tsintaosaurus was alive, China was covered in heavy tropical forests. It also had to coexist with animals like Shantungsaurus and Zhuchengtyrannus. Tsintaosaurus was about 27 feet long, so it wasn't the largest hadrosaur, but was still pretty big. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Tsintaosaurus' most iconic feature is its unicorn-like horn. If you know it for anything, it's this. But this unicorn horn is probably a misrepresentation. Skepticism around it started in the 90s, when Dr. David Weissample and an unnamed associate proposed that it was actually a broken nasal bone that caused the crest, and was actually a different dinosaur. Now, this was immediately met with skepticism because the dinosaur they suggested had tons of morphological differences, but it got people thinking whether or not the horn was the full picture. Eventually, in 2013, it was proposed that the horn was just the back part of a crest. But yeah, that wraps up the video. Hopefully I taught you guys some stuff about these animals and taught you how to pronounce them properly. And now, I know some of you are going to say, but you mispronounced some stuff in the video. That was on purpose. I played you. But thank you so much for watching. Bye.